Hey everyone! So our short-term memory is really important because it holds the information between our sensory memory and our long-term memory. So for example, when we see a new phone number like written on a piece of paper, it stays inside our iconic or our visual memory, which is a form of sensory memory, for less than 4 seconds. So at this point, it gets transferred to our short-term memory if we pay attention to it. That way we can do stuff with it, like write it down or dial the number before it starts to fade away from our memory. Then if it's important enough to us, or if we have some kind of emotional attachment to it, we'll store that phone number in our long-term memory. We wouldn't want everything that's in our sensory memory to go straight into our long-term memory because that would be completely overwhelming. So in a sense, the short-term memory gives us kind of a buffer to decide if we want to keep the information for good by choosing to give it attention and effort, or if it's something that can be forgotten. Alright, so the technical definition of short-term memory refers to the ability to hold a small amount of information in your mind for a short period of time. So we can only remember things in our short-term memory for so long, and how much information you can store and how long it lasts differ a little bit from person to person, but research on the subject has given us a pretty good estimate of the average duration and capacity of short-term memory storage. So let's start with capacity. In the world of psychology, the magic number of items that you can store in your short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 2. So this magic number 7 plus or minus 2 is based off an article written by American psychologist George Miller, and it's still kind of our standard today. The duration of short-term memory, so you can only keep 7 plus or minus 2 items in your head for so long. So if you make no effort to remember these items, they'll quickly disappear in a matter of seconds. You can, however, stretch this 18-second duration out to about 30 seconds if you actively rehearse and repeat the items in your head. But some psychologists say that technically you're just remembering what you last said instead of actually remembering the initial item. So it is debated. So now that we know about the capacity and the duration, let's talk about some theories of forgetting. Why do we forget? Why do pieces of information leave our short-term memory after a period of time? So one explanation is the decay theory. It's also called the trace decay theory of forgetting, and it's relatively simple. It states that memories decay over time. So when the memory is initially created, it leaves a trace of chemical changes in our brain, and as time passes, that trace fades away. So on the one hand, that theory is perfectly sensible. We're more likely to remember what we ate for lunch yesterday, but less likely to recall what we ate on a specific day like 4 years ago. But this theory has kind of been disputed, partly because people do have such strong memories of certain days in their lives. So people may recall significant or insignificant pieces of information from a long time ago, like a random day in their lives. So obviously we have to sometimes learn items multiple times for it to like stick in our brain. So this graph shows how much of a list is retained during each relearning period, which makes sense. We have no need to remember something if we don't use it often, and the more we use it, the more it would make sense for our brain to remember it. So that's how we decide if something is worth moving into our long-term memory from our short-term memory. Okay, so let's say you might remember what you had for breakfast yesterday, but not what you had for breakfast 2 years ago. There's a lot that has happened in your short-term memory between 2 years ago and yesterday. You've had thousands of meals, you were asked to remember probably phone numbers, study for tests, make mental notes for your friend's birthday, literally endless things. And even if you tried your hardest to remember what you had for breakfast on a specific date, there are so many things that distracted you and your memory, and it would just never stored long term. So there's another theory that tries to explain why we forget things, and it's that we simply displace previous memories. So in a study by Glanzer and Kunitz in 1966, researchers gave participants a list of information to memorize, and then the participants were separated into two groups. So the first group recalled the items immediately, but the second group was given a distraction task to complete for a few seconds before being asked to recall the information. And the results from this study supported what is called the serial position effect. And so that's where the information at the beginning and the end of the list was more likely to be recalled by the participants. However, the group that completed the distraction task were much less likely to recall the items at the end of the list. So psychologists in that study quickly learned that those items were stored in short-term memory, but with the distractions, they were really quickly displaced. So this distraction task displaced all of the original lists, and this theory of forgetting is called the displacement theory.